ஓம் நமோ நாராயணாய.
ஸ்ரீராம ஜெயம். எல்லாருக்கும் நமஸ்காரம். கதவிருக்ஷா வழங்கும் திருவோணம் திருநாள் நிகழ்ச்சியுடைய இன்றைய பகுதிக்கு உங்கள் எல்லாரையும் வெல்கம் பண்ணுறதுல ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமாக இருக்குது. ஒவ்வொரு மாதமும் ஸ்ரவண நட்சத்திரத்தன்னைக்கு உங்கள் எல்லாரையும் இந்த நிகழ்ச்சியில் சந்திக்கிறதுல ரொம்பவே ஆனந்தமாக இருக்குது. நம்ம ஒவ்வொரு மாதமும் இந்த நாளில் பகவத்கீதாலேருந்து ஒரு ஸ்லோகம், அதுக்கான மேலோட்டமான விளக்கமும் டீட்டெயில் எக்ஸ்பிளனேஷன், ஆச்சாரியர்கள்லாம் என்ன சொல்லியிருக்கா, அது சம்பந்தப்பட்ட கதைகள், இன்னையோடைய வாழ்க்கை சூழ்நிலைக்கு அது எப்படியெல்லாம் நம்மளுக்கு வழி காமிச்சுருக்கு, இது எல்லாத்தையும் தெரிஞ்சுட்டு வரோம். இது ரொம்ப பியூட்டிஃபுல்லாக நம்ம எல்லாருக்கும் ப்ரெசென்ட் பண்ணிட்டு வரா ஸ்ரீமதி டாக்டர் ஸ்ரீவித்யா சத்யமூர்த்தி அவர்கள். இன்றைக்கும் ஒரு அற்புதமான ஸ்லோகம், அதுக்கான ரொம்ப விசேஷமான விளக்கம், என்ன ஸ்லோகமாக இருக்கும், என்ன விளக்கமாக இருக்கும் அப்படின்னு நீங்கள் எல்லாருமே வெயிட் பண்ணிட்டு இருப்பீங்க. நொந்துடலும் கிழமாகி தளர்ந்த பின் நோயில் அடங்கிடும் போதும், ஜீவநாடிகள் நைந்திடும் போதும், மனம் எண்ணிடுமோ தெரியாது தெரியாது. இன்று கசிந்துனை கூவுகிறேன், அருள் செய்திடுவாய் ஹரிநாராயணா ஹரிநாராயண 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 நாராயணா. இந்த வரிகளை எக்ஸ்பிளைன் பண்ண போகிற அற்புதமான ஸ்லோகம் அண்ட் அதுக்கான விளக்கம் தான் நீங்கள் எல்லாரும் கேட்க போகிறீர்கள். வித்தவுட் டிலே, லெட்ஸ் ஆல் லிசன் டு த பியூட்டிஃபுல் எபிசோட் ஆஃப் பகவத் கீதா.
Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Before we begin today's Gita verse, let us listen to a charanam of a Harinama Sankirtanam. Santata Hari Ninna Shasira Namava, Santata Hari Ninna Shasira Namava, ಅಂತರಂಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಉಳಗೇರಿಸಿಯಂತೋ ಪುರಂದರ ವಿಠಲರಾಯನ, ಎಂತೋ ಪುರಂದರ ವಿಠಲರಾಯನ, ಅಂತ್ಯಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಚಿಂತಿಸೋ ಹಾಗೆ ನಾರಾಯಣ. Here, the great Purandaradasa is telling the Lord that always make me keep your names in my mind, just like how I do it at the time of death. Welcome to this session of impactful Gita verses. We hope that you have been enjoying our sessions and have had an opportunity to ponder over the chosen verses. Today we chose a few very important shlokas from the Gita that teach us an important truth and also how to live our life all the time in this material world in the remembrance of the Lord in order to achieve the goal of moksha or liberation. So here are the shlokams. Om Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om Shri Krishna Paramatmane Namaha. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Atha Ashthamodhyayah Akshara Brahma Yogaha. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha antಃkale cha mameva smaran muktva kalevaram yah prayati samadbhavam yati nastyatra samshayah yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajantyante kalevaram tam tam evaiti kaunteya sada tat bhava bhavitah tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mamanusmara yudhyacha mayyarpitamano buddhir mame vaishyasya samshayam. Om Tat Sat iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita su Upanishadsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Akshara Brahma Yogo Nama Ashtamodhyayah. So, the literal meaning of these verses are as follows. Those who relinquish the body while remembering me at the moment of death will come to me. There is certainly no doubt about this. This is what Lord Krishna says. Whatever one remembers upon giving up the body at the time of death, O son of Kunti, one attains that state, being always absorbed in such contemplation. Therefore, always remember me and also do your duty of fighting the war. With mind and intellect surrendered to me, you will definitely attain me. Of this, there is no doubt. Here, to provide a little context, the Lord is responding to Arjuna's question in the beginning of this chapter 8. Arjuna asked, what is Adhyatma? What is Adidaiva? What is Adibhuta? What is Karma and Adiyagnya? What should one who is a Sthita Prajna or a steadfast person think of you at the time of death? How should they do this? To this, the Lord began by saying that the supreme, indestructible, imperishable entity is called Brahman. One's own self is called Adhyatma. The creative actions pertaining to the personality of each living being and its development are called karma. The physical manifestation that is constantly changing or that is perishable is called Adibhuta. The universal form of God, which presides over the celestial beings in creation, is called Adidaiva. I, who dwell in the heart of every living being, am called Adiyagnya. When an individual lives in the awareness of this knowledge, always conscious of the play of the self in all levels, physical, mental, and intellectual levels of the personality, one becomes the divine witness who is seen able to observe the process of death with a true detachment in the knowledge of the layers of connections between the perishable and the imperishable. With this background, let us try to understand that when the physical body is not needed anymore by the soul or the self within, once the samskaras or vasanas are exhausted to the extent possible, this physical body is shed away like a piece of old cloth. But what is the subtle body, including the mind, ego, and intellectual thinking at the time of that final moment? Whatever this subtle body is thinking will determine the trajectory of that subtle body. This last powerful will of the consciousness decides the future destiny. Whatever object one thinks of at the time of death, Swami Chinmayananda says, whether it's a dog or God, that alone will be reached by that person. This goes to the philosophy of as you think, so you become. Whatever are our deepest samskaras, those are the ones that are bound to come to us. It is one's state of consciousness and the object of their absorption at the time of death that determines their next birth. But for one who is immersed in the consciousness of the perishable nature of this form, then these truly God-realized people, by consciously absorbing their mind in the supreme name or form or virtue of God, even at the time of death, they can choose their destiny of liberation and not having rebirth. A mind that is immersed in its egotistical thoughts that identify with the physical body will be thinking of thoughts based on the sensuous thought pattern and will tend to take a lower, more animalistic form in order to fulfill those desires. A person who thinks of food, for example, all the time will crave food. A mother who is very attached to her children will think of them at the time of her death. On the other hand, a consciousness that is more evolved, one that realizes the futility or the waste of the sensuous life, that is filled with mumukshutvam or the desire to be with the higher, will end up at the highest possible level and will not return. So when the mind is completely turned towards the highest self, this self will reach the eternal and immortal. The question then arises as to, do you think that at the moment of the excruciating experience of death, is one going to think of the Lord? For example, suppose I hurt my foot on the doorstep. I have terrible pain, and in that instinct, as a natural reflex, do I say God's name or do I say a curse in my anger and pain? Now, if one is not able to utter the name Rama or Narayana when I have a small pain, then am I going to say the name at the final moment of my life, knowing that death is very painful experience? Would I be in a condition to think of Narayana? So, when one is all packed up and prepared to leave, is that when one is going to plan where they're going to travel? Or is one going to make a plan in advance and decide, no, this is not where I want to go, and this is where I want to go? Are we going to be prepared at the time of death to suddenly think of God if we have not been doing it before? For example, one may teach their pet parrot to say hello or have a good day. However, if somebody attacks the parrot, it's going to forget all that it learned and it's going to screech the natural sounds of tea, or whatever the parrot sounds like. Likewise, the channels of thoughts that we create by our habits during our lifelong thought pattern, at the time of death, the same thought patterns are going to flow in our mind. What we constantly think about and meditate about throughout our life, these things are influenced by our daily habits. Therefore, it is natural that these would continue to determine our final thoughts. But here there is another thing. Most of us do not want to think of our death. People avoid thinking of their death and they never think about it, even though they know that it is certain and even though they see it around them every day. Here, Vinoba Bhave shares a beautiful story of Sant Eknath, who was a Vitthala Bhakta. Sant Eknath was asked one day by a man, "Your life seems so pure and simple. You never lose your temper or quarrel with anybody, but ours is not." So Eknath told him, "Don't worry about me. I just found out something about you. In 7 days from now, you're going to die." The man thought, "What? Only 7 days?" He rushed home and started making preparations for the end. He got sick and then 6 days passed. On the 7th day, Eknath went to see him and inquired, "How are you doing?" The man said, "I'm about to leave this world." Eknath asked him, "How many sins did you commit in the last 6 days? How many evil thoughts came to you in your mind?" The man said, "Where is the time for that? Death was always there before my eyes." To which Eknath said, "Now you see why the lives of people like me are sinless. When death is always standing before you, ready to pounce like a tiger, how can the mind commit evil thoughts? Even to commit the sins, the mind needs to be relaxed." Here is another story, the story of Ajamilan from Srimad Bhagavatam. When Parikshit asked Shukacharya how to avoid Naragam or the horrible experiences of hell, then Shukacharya narrated this skanda and the story of Ajamilan. He said, "If a man with a feeling of passionate attachment unites his mind with Krishna even once, he will not see Yama or Yamadutas with the noose in their hand, even in his dreams." So the Ajamilan story goes this way. He was a good Brahmin and he used to perform all his duties, take care of his wife, family, parents, and everything very appropriately. And all of a sudden, he got into bad habits. After meeting this woman in the forest, he started to live with her. He abandoned his family and parents. He had 10 children with the woman, and he made a living and supported this large family by blackmailing the rich people, by cheating, by fraud, and by gambling. Still, he named his youngest son as Narayana, and he was very attached to him. So much so that even when he was eating or drinking, relaxing or working, he always wanted Narayana to be by his side. When finally the call came from Yama, it was sudden and he was in agony, and he called his youngest son Narayana to his side. He said, "Oh Narayana," and he did it in great fear. As death was nearing, the Yamadutas came with their noose, but what they found was there were 4 figures. Each of them had 4 hands, and these 4 people were preventing the Yamadutas from discharging their duty. These were the Vishnudutas. There was an intense discussion and conversation between the Yamadutas and Vishnudutas, or messengers of Narayana. They discussed dharma and adharma, varnas and duties, etc. The Yamadutas said, "As the sun and the fire god Agni and Vayu and the moon and the elements of earth, water, as Kala, and even the Lord of Dharma, who is Yamaraja himself, has witnessed, based on the actions of this man, his subtle body is ours, the Yamadutas. He needs to pay the price for all his actions. But the Vishnudutas said, this Ajamilan, even though he has forgotten his real divine nature, he pronounced the name of Narayana at the time of his death. And by that very action, he has done the prayaschitta for all his sins. Even the worst sinners can be forgiven just by the name of saying the name of Narayana. Narayana will protect them and take them under his care. Saying the name Narayana can remove all our samskaras and thereby prevent even the future evil deeds. Just like the wood that is burnt by fire, saying the Lord's name can remove all the sins and pavams. After all this explanation by the messengers of Vishnu or Vishnu Dutas, the Yamadutas, they left. They didn't take Ajamila with him. In the meantime, Ajamila came to his consciousness and he remembered everything that happened in the presence of his subtle body. And he was completely shocked. He realized the gravity of what happened, that at the mercy of Lord Narayana, the Yamadutas were not able to take his life. He realized just by saying the name of his son, not even because it's the Lord's name, if this can happen, what could happen if, with a full consciousness of the greatness of the divine, if he is able to live a noble life of dharma in the memory of the Lord? So at that moment, Ajamilan renounced everything. He went to Kashi and he engaged in meditation, and at the due course, he reached the abode of Narayana. So from this story, we are learning that even mentioning Hari's name, even without an intent, can remove the sins and prevent even the Yamadutas from taking us. And this is why many of our people name our children with the Lord's names, that even we can be saying the Lord's names without even the intention of thinking of him. However, even by taking his name by accident, if we can be saved, then do we want to leave such a thing to a chance? Do we not want to prepare ourselves such that when the time comes, we truly chant Narayana's name with the love for him in our hearts? Do we want to be like Ajamilan, or do we want to be like Jadabharadan, whose story we're going to hear shortly? Now, even though we know that the moment the body is born in the earthly plane, death is certain, even though we subconsciously know this, we do not think of death. We say, I'm just in school now, or college, or oh, I just had kids, my kids need to be married, I need to have grandkids, etc., etc. But when death comes, we are not prepared. We are taken by shock. And then it is too late to train our thoughts to focus on him and him alone. That is why it is essential to use the faculties to prepare in advance, to create the channels of higher aspirations, divine aspirations that are known as Adhyatma Samskaras, so that one can create the thought patterns and channels needed to utter those words and have those thoughts at that final moment of death. So who is Jadabharadan and what did he teach us? The Bhagavatam tells us another story of a king called Bharata. Bharata, he gave up his kingdom and he wanted to pursue realization of God. And so he moved to the forest and lived the life of an ascetic. Once he was meditating, but he saw a deer jump into a river. The deer was pregnant and she was trying to get away from a tiger. Out of fear, she delivered the baby in the water. And she had no way to rescue the newborn and she crossed off to the other side of the river. Witnessing this entire thing, Bharatan felt pity for the deer and he went, saved the baby, took him to his hut, started feeding the baby grass and everything and started growing the baby deer. Soon he became very attached to this deer. His mind was totally absorbed in this deer. Now he was not meditating on God anymore. And then the time came for his death. Even at that moment of death, he was so concerned about the deer, the baby deer, and he was calling its name. And as a result, the King Bharata, was born as a deer in his next life. However, since he was an elevated soul, he knew about his prior birth and he was aware of what had happened. So even as a deer, he spent his entire life near ashrams or near sages and ascetics, and he was always in the memory of the Lord. And when he died as a deer, he was born as a human again. And this time he completed his sadhana and eventually he became known as the great Jadabharadan. So therefore, Lord Krishna is saying that it is not easy to think of me at the time of death. So one must prepare themselves by thinking of the Lord during all their activities. In this case, Krishna is telling Arjuna, fight, but have your mind and intellect on me and be absorbed in me, and you shall come to me when you leave your physical body. Again, the Lord is reiterating that one must do their worldly duties, but one's mind should always be thinking of God. The very instant we forget God, our mind will be taken over by the evils of Maya, such as desire, greed, jealousy, lust, anger, hatred, attachment. Therefore, it's necessary that we keep our mind always attached to God, essentially defining Karma Yoga as the only way to be able to achieve our ultimate goal of liberation or moksha. While doing any duties and all duties, the mind should always be thinking of God, and the remembrance cannot be intermittent but constant throughout the day and even during our sleep in Yoga Nidra. Kabir has beautifully expressed this in his Doha. Sumiran ki sudiyon karo, jo gagar panihari, bolat dolat surati mein, kahe Kabir vichari. He said, remember God, just as the village woman remembers the water pot on her head. She may speak to others, she may walk along the path, but her mind and concentration is always on the water pot, so it doesn't fall off from the head. So we must always think of the Lord in everything we do, regardless of how involved we are in our actions. In this regard, our own Periyarvar has said, Seenal serinderiya punmel, setral yeri kuழம்பிருந்து, எங்கும் ஈனால் அரிப்புண்டு மயங்கி, எல்லைவாய் சென்று சேர்வதன் முன்னம், வாயினால் நமோ நாரணா என்று, மத்தகத்திடை கைகளை கூப்பி, போயினால் பின்னை இத்திசைக்கென்றும், பிணை கொடுக்கிலும் போக ஒட்டாரே. சோர்வினால் பொருள் வைத்ததுண்டாகில் சொல்லு சொல்லென்று சுற்றும் இருந்து வினவிலும் வாய் திறவாதே அந்த காலம் அடைவதன் முன்னம் மார்வம் என்பதோர் கோவில் அமைத்து மாதவன் என்னும் தெய்வத்தை நாட்டி ஆர்வம் என்பதோர் பூவிட வல்லார்க்கு அரவதண்டத்தில் உய்யலுமாமே. Here, Periyalvar is telling us, at the end of life, when our body is full of pus, and this pus is pouring, and there are flies sitting on the pus, with a lot of pain, we are barely conscious at the time, and we are almost near that death. But before all that, we should utter the name Namo Narayana. And then even the Yamadutas cannot be able to get their hands on us, not even for a fraction of a second. And he said, at the end of our lives, when we have actually hidden our wealth everywhere and we are not even able to tell our relatives where this wealth is, we are not able to say anything, we are not able to talk. Instead of waiting until that time, he says, we should be, while we are able to talk, we should build a beautiful temple in the heart, and we should put a person called Sriman Narayanan as the Lord in our heart, and with the greatest flower of bhakti, if we can say his name, then even from the path of Yama, we can all be saved, so that we will never be reborn. With this, we conclude this episode, and let us pray that all of us are able to keep the Lord in our heart and mind with every action that we perform, so that we can have a life that is fulfilled and end with a liberation from this rebirth. Thank you for listening, and please let us know your thoughts and comments in the feedback section. And until next time, Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha, Shri Krishnarpanamastu.
Thank you so very much to Dr. Srividya Sathiyamoorthy for another amazing Gita episode on Thiruvonam Thirunaal. Bhagavad நாமாவுடைய அற்புதம், அதுக்கான முக்கியத்துவம் என்ன அப்படின்றத ரொம்ப அழகாக நாங்கள்லாம் தெரிஞ்சுட்டோம். அஜமிழனுடைய கதை, அது மட்டும் இல்லாமல் பரத மகாராஜாவுடைய கதை, கடைசியில் பெரியாழ்வாருடைய பாசுரம் எல்லாமே இன்னையோட எபிசோடை ரொம்ப அற்புதமாக அமைச்செடுத்து. தேங்க்யூ வெரி மச் ஒன்ஸ் அகெயின் ஆன் பிஹாஃப் ஆஃப் கதவ்ரிக்ஷா. வியூவர்ஸ் அண்ட் ஆடியன்ஸ், நீங்கள் எல்லாருமே இன்னையோட எபிசோடை கண்டிப்பாக நன்னா கேட்டு அனுபவிச்சிருப்பேன்னு நினைக்கிறேன். பகவான் நாமா எவ்வளோ முக்கியன்றது நம்ம எல்லாருக்குமே தெரியும். அதை இன்னும் நன்னா எம்ஃபசைஸ் பண்ணுற மாதிரி ஒரு அற்புதமான எபிசோட் தான் நம்ம எல்லாரும் இன்றைக்கி கேட்டோம். அண்ட் உங்கள் எல்லாருக்குமே இது கண்டிப்பாக பிடிச்சிருக்கும் அப்படின்னு நினைக்கிறேன். இதே மாதிரி உங்கள் கதவிருக்ஷா சேனலில் இன்னும் நிறையா நல்ல நிகழ்ச்சிகள் வந்துட்டே இருக்குது. அடுத்த வாரம் திங்கக்கிழமையிலேருந்து ஸ்ரீராம நவமி உற்சவம் ராகவனை போற்றுவோம் நிகழ்ச்சி ஆரம்பிக்க போகிறது. இந்த வருஷமும் ராகவனை போற்றுவோம் நிகழ்ச்சியில் ரொம்ப அற்புதமான நிகழ்ச்சிகள்லாம் தான் நீங்கள் எல்லாரும் பார்க்க போகிறேன். கண்டிப்பாக மிஸ் பண்ணாமல் எல்லாத்தையும் பாருங்க. எங்கள் ப்ரோக்ராம்ஸ்லாம் எப்படி இருந்ததுன்றதுக்கான ஃபீட்பேக்கையும் கமெண்ட்ஸ் பாக்ஸில் மென்ஷன் பண்ணுங்க. உங்கள் எல்லாரையும் மறுபடியும் ராகவனை போற்றுவோம் நிகழ்ச்சியில் உங்கள் எல்லாரையும் நான் சந்திக்கிறேன். அது வரைக்கும் நமஸ்காரம்.